Good afternoon, everyone. It's a few minutes past 2 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Andreas Bitsarakis, and I am the Director of Broadband Spectrum for Select Spectrum. Thank you to everyone taking the time to join us today. If you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box. Please note that this webinar has a feature to raise a hand, and if the question is relevant to the current topic or slide, I will answer them during the presentation, but if not, we will conduct a Q&A at the end of the webinar. Since most people here today have either attended a presentation or a previous webinar or might just be familiar with the background of 2.5 gigahertz educational broadband spectrum, I'll spend less time speaking of the spectrum and more time on the current matter at hand, which is the FCC's Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So on the current slide, you will see a timeline of how things have transpired over the years in relation to EBS. It was first established in 1963 by the FCC as Instructional Television Fixed Service for Educational TV, also known as ITFS. In the 1970s, excess capacity leasing was made allowed and wireless cable TV launched. In the 1990s, wireless cable gave way to two-way fixed internet access. In January of 2005, the FCC approved new two-way fixed and mobile wireless rules, which opened up significant opportunities. In 2014, the leading solution to the problem at hand was called the consensus proposal. It was submitted to the FCC by some of the most prominent organizations within the EBS community, and those organizations are the National EBS Association, also known as NEBSA, Catholic Technology Network, also known as CTN, the Hispanic Information and Telecommunications Network, also known as HITN, and the Wireless Communications Association, also known as the WCA. The consensus proposal states that if the license touches a portion of a county, it will expand to cover the entire county unless it runs into another license's expansion. If in places where there are no licenses, new applications would be accepted on a first-come, first-served basis. In 2018, the FCC released a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, also known as the NPRM, which stated three application windows. First, a window for existing licensees, allowing them to expand their service to county boundaries. Second, a window for tribal nations located in rural areas. And third, a window for new educational entities that do not currently hold any 2.5 gigahertz EBS licenses. The FCC proposes to make any spectrum remaining after these priority windows available for commercial use through competitive bidding. So what are some of the benefits of the existing EBS structure? Current EBS rules have been working well for years, benefiting schools, communities, lessors, and commercial operators in both urban and rural areas. There is a small percentage of license holders that build and maintain their own network. Most license holders elect to lease their licenses to commercial operators due to the expense of building and maintaining a network, but it is an option for those that do have the funding. Hundreds of schools and colleges leasing to Sprint and dozens of rural fixed wireless operators and serving more than 100,000 rural customers. The FCC requires that part of the license, specifically 5%, is reserved for educational purposes. This is typically accomplished by giving the license holder a certain number of free devices that can be used on the network. The licenses can be leased to a commercial operator, and this would result in lease royalty payments to the license holder. The FCC's proposed rules will lead to EBS becoming a commercial, not educational service and stop most rural deployments. So the FCC proposed a third filing window which will create mutually exclusive applications, and the result will be auctions against commercial entities. Sprint entities won 74% of licenses in the 2009 2.5 gigahertz auction. Sprint has not been building the EBS-based wireless systems in small cities, towns, or rural areas, and more so in urban population-rich areas. What is a possible solution to this? The FCC should have a first-come, first-served application window. Schools and colleges have been waiting for the spectrum since 1995. If schools and small rural operators let the FCC and Congress know, there is still time to preserve EBS. Now we'll take a look at a few of the current commercial uses. So obviously WISPs, also known as wireless internet service providers, have constructed fixed wireless networks. Sprint has constructed 4G LTE mobile wireless cellular networks covering about 40% of the US population, mostly in major cities. Next, we'll look at the band plan. Since there are a lot of schools on the webinar today, I won't dig into a lot of the technical aspects, but there are a couple points to take away from this slide. The first is there are really two different categories in this band. The first is EBS, or Educational Broadband Service. EBS licenses make up about 5/8 of the band and can only be held by educational institutions or nonprofit educational organizations. The other category is BRS, or Broadband Radio Service. The BRS licenses can be held by anyone, including commercial entities. One other takeaway from this slide is a typical license is 4 channels or 22.5 megahertz. Take, for example, the A channel. You'll see A1, A2, and A3 are in the lower band and are 5.5 megahertz each for a total of 16.5 megahertz. The other portion of the license, A4, is 6 megahertz and is in the middle band for a total of 22.5 megahertz. Some licenses are less than 22.5 megahertz and far fewer are more than 22.5 megahertz. Now that we've seen what licenses look from a spectral point of view, let's take a look at them geographically. A standard license is a circle with a 35-mile radius. But as you can see from the pictures on your screen, not all of the licenses are a complete circle. This is a result of a license on the same frequency running into another license. So you'll see that it creates sort of a football-looking shape. Here's a nationwide map showing basically EBS spectrum as it is today. You'll see the green circles, or I should say shapes, are where current EBS licenses are located. The purple shade is where these licenses can potentially expand out to per the consensus proposal. And the white area are unserved areas of the country where there are no 2.5 gigahertz EBS licenses. So here are some impacts of the current NPRM proposed by the FCC. Educational institutions are at risk of being stripped of an opportunity that was already given to other schools and colleges in roughly 50% of the US. The process will lead to direct commercial auctions, most likely, won by Sprint. Mostly because of their financial capabilities. Spectrum would continue to go unused, and there would be no solution to wireless internet coverage in rural American communities. EBPARC stands for Educators and Broadband Providers for American and Rural Communities, and it consists of commercial operators in schools that do not hold licenses. And it's advised for them to partner to encourage FCC to proceed in a way that continues to benefit education and rural American communities. EBPARC's overall goal is to influence the FCC to issue new licenses to educational institutions at the earliest possible date. Also note that any assistance from Select Spectrum in regards to obtaining a license when this time comes will be at no cost to educators. Now we'll revisit some benefits of obtaining an EBS license. So licenses can be used to provide broadband access to unserved or underserved areas benefiting students, faculty, and the community. The vast majority of these licenses are in rural areas, and they can be used to provide broadband access to the respective areas. The licenses can be leased to a commercial operator. This would result in lease royalty payments to the license holder. As we stated before, the FCC states that a part of the license is reserved for educational use. This typically is accomplished by the operator giving the license holder free devices to be used on their network or service credits to access the network. Like we spoke about before also, there are a small percentage of license holders that build and maintain their own network. Most license holders elect to lease their licenses to commercial operators due to the expense of building and maintaining a network, but it is an option for those that do have the funding. Why does EBPARC matter? We feel that an additional push from new potential license holders and commercial operators may help facilitate the progress at the FCC, which is consistent with the FCC's goals, which is encouraging broadband access in rural America, making more spectrum available, stimulating rural infrastructure improvements at zero cost to the taxpayer, and to support education in rural communities. This slide summarizes why we need your help. We need the help of educational institutions. I think this is primarily because many educational institutions are unaware of EBS license and the benefits of owning one. We need the educational institutions to tell the FCC why this is important to their educational mission. Ultimately, we need your help to provide rural America sufficient wireless coverage and to help stop the process that is currently taking this opportunity from educational institutions. Next steps for EBPARC. So parties that wish to participate in EBPARC should contact me as soon as possible at Select Spectrum. Commercial operators should partner with an educational institutions in areas that are not yet licensed. Ultimately, schools should file comment to the current FCC NPRM and work with other members of EBPARC to convey unified messages to the FCC and Congress. As you see on this slide, please take my contact information and reach out with any questions or concerns. Select Spectrum has an abundance of resources that can be shared regarding this effort, such as fill-in templates and executive summaries, so on and so forth. So please reach out if you have any questions or we can be of any assistance.